Poštovane dame i gospodo, dobrodošli na svečani akademski čin dodjele počasnog doktorata Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta profesoru doktoru Thomasu Schwartzu. Molim vas, ustanite. Pljeskom dočekajmo rektora Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta zajedno s profesorom Schwartzom, prorektorima, dekanima i pročelnicima sveučilišnih odjela. Akademski čin započet ćemo molitvom i pozdravom domovini Hrvatskoj.
U ime Oca i Sina i Duha Svetoga. Svemogući i milosrdni Bože, izvore svake istine, mudrosti i dobra. Pred Tobom se danas sabiremo u ovom svečanom trenutku zahvalnosti i priznanja. Zahvaljujemo Ti za dar razuma i duha kojim obogaćuješ čovjeka i kojim ga pozivaš da traži istinu, služi dobru i gradi zajedništvo među ljudima i narodima. Hvala Ti za akademski poziv, koji nije samo put znanja, nego i put odgovornosti, savjesti i služenja. Posebno Ti danas zahvaljujemo za život i djelovanje profesora doktora znanosti Thomasa Schwartza, za njegov znanstveni rad, zauzeto za čovjeka i doprinos dijalogu, solidarnosti i općem dobru. Neka njegov primjer i njegovo djelo budu nadahnuće ovoj akademskoj zajednici i svima koji u znanju traže put prema mudrosti. Blagoslovi ovu svečanost, naše sveučilište i sve koji u njemu djeluju, profesore i studente, suradnike i goste. Daj da sve što činimo bude prožeto istinoljubivošću, pravednošću i poniznošću na izgradnju čovjeka i na Tvoju slavu. To Te molimo po Kristu, Gospodinu našemu. Amen. Slava Otcu i Sinu i Duhu Svetomu, kako bijaše na početku, tako i sada i vazda i u vijeke vjekova. Amen. Blaženi Alojzije Stepinče, u ime Oca i Sina i Duha Svetoga. Amen.
Domovino, o junačka
Molim vas, sjednite. Cijenjeni uzvanici, dame i gospodo, u radosti i svečanosti akademskog čina dodjele počasnog doktorata profesoru doktoru Thomasu Schwartzu, ravnatelju Zaklade Renovabis Njemačke biskupske konferencije, želim pozdraviti sve drage goste. Počašćeni smo što su danas ovdje s nama. Monsignor Ivan Šaško, pomoćni biskup zagrebački, izaslanik preuzvišenog gospodina Dražena Kutleše, zagrebačkog nadbiskupa metropolita i velikog kancelara Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta. Kao i dragi gosti, apostolski nunci u Republici Hrvatskoj, monsignor Đorđo Lingua, preuzvišeni monsignor Ivo Martinović, biskup požeški, preuzvišeni monsignor Ivan Ćurić, pomoćni biskup đakovačko-osječki, imenovani pomoćni biskup zagrebački monsignor Marko Kovač. Danas su nam se također pridružili u ime ministra znanosti, obrazovanja i mladih profesora doktora Radovana Fuksa, državna tajnica docentica Iva Ivanković, docent dr. Krunoslav Novak, generalni tajnik Hrvatske biskupske konferencije, sestra Marija Mojca Šimenc, generalna tajnica Slovenske biskupske konferencije, poglavarice i poglavari redovničkih zajednica, ravnatelji Karitasa Zagrebačke i Vrh Bosanske nadbiskupije, kao i ravnatelj Karitasa Banja Luka, ravnatelji i predstavnici agencija, centara, instituta, zaklada, bolnica, klinika i katoličkih škola. Srdačno pozdravljamo također prijatelje i suradnike profesora Schwartza iz Hrvatske, Njemačke, Slovenije, Srbije i Bosne i Hercegovine, članove Senata, članove studentskog zbora, kao i cijelu akademsku zajednicu Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta, predstavnike društvenog života, predstavnike poslovnog svijeta, predstavnike svijeta umjetnosti i kulture, kao i prisutne medije. Dopustite nam da na početku izrazimo iskrenu zahvalnost svima vama koji ste svojim dolaskom obogatili ovaj svečani akademski čin. Vaša prisutnost za naše sveučilište predstavlja snažnu potvrdu ugleda i vrijednota koje njegujemo, ali i duboko poštovanje prema akademskoj zajednici i njezinim nastojanjima u crkvi i hrvatskom društvu. Za slavljenika profesora doktora Thomasa Schwartza, primatelja počasnog doktorata, vaš dolazak osobito je priznanje i znak zahvalnosti za njegova nastojanja, za razvoj znanosti i društvene odgovornosti, te za doprinos vidljiv u našim zajednicama, osobito u skrbi za razvoj odgoja, školstva i visokog obrazovanja. Stoga molim rektora Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta, profesora doktora Željka Tanjića, da pozdravi cijenjeni skup. Gospodine rektore, izvolite.
Možemo na kraju jedan pljesak za sve vas, evo. Već na početku. Poštovani, danas Hrvatsko katoličko sveučilište drugi put u svojih 20 godina postojanja, 10 godina nakon dodjele prvog počasnog doktorata uzoritom gospodinu kardinalu Gerhardu Ludvigu Milleru, slavi akademski čin dodjele počasnog doktorata profesoru doktoru Thomasu Schwartzu, ravnatelju Zaklade Renovabis Njemačke biskupske konferencije, te prijatelju našeg sveučilišta i Hrvatske. Ovo radosno i zahvalno slavlje nije samo akademsko priznanje svećeniku, teologu, socijalnom etičaru Thomasu Schwartzu, već također izraz i potvrda onih vrijednosti koje tvore naše sveučilište, a koje naš novi počasni doktor svojom osobnošću, svećeničkim životom i služenjem, akademskom ozbiljnošću i crkvenom i društvenom zauzetošću svjedoči posebice u mjesnim crkvama Srednje i Istočne Europe. Nošen snagom vjere u Kristovo sebedarje za svakog čovjeka, profesor Schwartz djeluje tako da učvršćuje, produbljuje razumijevanje i zajedništvo mjesnih crkava, čiji su odnosi pored proročke snage u njihovim društvima ponekad bili i jesu i danas opterećeni i nerazumijevanjem i sumnjičavostima zbog različitih shvaćanja življenja crkvenosti, čineći djelotvornim socijalni nauk crkve, učvršćujući solidarnost među ljudima, narodima i društvima, jačajući pravednost te iskazujući svesrdnu brigu za ugrožene, osobito za one na rubu društva kojima crkva pristupa s osobitom pozornošću. To se danas posebice odnosi na zauzetost i solidarnost s našom braćom i sestrama u Ukrajini, koji su žrtva brutalne ruske agresije, ali i žrtve nerazumijevanja, površnih pristupa, zaborava i nebrige. Stoga među brigama profesora Schwartza posebno mjesto zauzima skrb za nama drago i prijateljsko ukrajinsko katoličko sveučilište u Lvivu. Poveznica između Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta i Thomasa Schwartza nije slučajna. Ona se gradila još od vremena kada našeg sveučilišta nije bilo. Kao student u Rimu i član papinskog zavoda Germanicum et Hungaricum, u kojem se već stoljećima odgajaju i obrazuju i svećenički kandidati iz crkava Srednje i Istočne Europe, među kojima je bio naš zaštitnik blaženi Alojzije Stepinac, Tomas, smijem tako reći, još u vrijeme komunizma imao prilike upoznati se s ljudima i prilikama crkve iza željezne zavjese, koji su crkve iz Zapadne Europe pomagale i duhovno i materijalno koliko je bilo moguće. Iz tih su poznanstava nastala i prijateljstva koja su se proširivala u vrijeme Tomasove župničke službe i akademskog djelovanja na sveučilištu u Augsburgu. Providnost je sve to vodila k poslanju koje je prihvatio, a kojemu je povjerila njemačka biskupska konferencija, ravnatelj Zaklade Renovabis. Nakon što je postao ravnatelj zaklade, velečasni Schwartz je prepoznao djelovanje našeg sveučilišta u hrvatskom društvu i crkvi, te je zajedno sa suradnicima na temelju pomno izrađenih projekata dao materijalni i duhovni doprinos njegovu stasanju i razvoju. Posebno želim istaknuti da je kroz cijelo ovo vrijeme, unatoč mnoštvu obaveza, gotovo svake godine od kada je ravnatelj Renovabisa pronalazio vremena da kao teolog, svećenik i profesor drži predavanja našim studentima i tako svojim djelovanjem oplemeni njih i naše akademsko djelovanje. U vremenu u kojem izazovi pred pojedincima i zajednicama postaju sve složeniji, njegov primjer potvrđuje da se znanost, vjera i društveno odgovorno djelovanje nadopunjuju i međusobno jačaju. Njegovo teološko promišljanje ne ograničava se na akademsko područje. Ono je orijentir koji usmjerava na djelovanje, na etičko razlučivanje i na uključenost u angažirano društveno življenje. Puno toga o Thomasu Schwartzu bit će rečeno i u prigodnom slovu laudacijom, kako je to uobičajeno na ovom akademskom činu. Kao rektor, zahvalan sam Bogu na današnjem danu. Hvala Senatu sveučilište, velikom kancelaru monsignoru Draženu Kutleši, zagrebačkom nadbiskupu i metropolitu što su podržali ovaj prijedlog. Povjerenstvu na čelu s prorektorom profesorom doktorom Gordanom Črpićem što su izradili stručno izvješće, prorektoru profesoru doktoru Anti Crnčeviću i doktorici Suzani Obrovac-Lipar sa suradnicima na pripremi ovoga slavlja. Veseli me prisutnost mnogih prijatelja našeg sveučilišta iz Hrvatske, Bosne i Hercegovine i Slovenije. Hvala vam svima što ste došli, od naših dragih biskupa, državne tajnice iz ministarstva koje nas uvijek podupere i prati, koji smo zahvalni za sve ono što čine za naše sveučilište, svim dragim prijateljima iz društvenog, kulturnog, akademskoga, političkoga i crkvenoga života. Draga mi je prisutnost mnogih prijatelja Zaklade Renovabis s kojima se obično susrećemo na kongresu ili u Freisingu ili u Berlinu. Jer ovaj je počasni doktorat ujedno i priznanje neumornoj Zaklade Renovabis i Njemačkoj biskupskoj konferenciji za sve dobro koje su učinile crkvama u Srednjoj i Istočnoj Europi, priznanje za njihovu bratsku i sestrinsku solidarnost i potporu posebice u Hrvatskoj. Sigurni smo da će se ti oblici djelovanja i suradnje nastaviti i u budućnosti. Tomasova služba na čelu Zaklade Renovabis utjelovljuje je poslanje same zaklade. Vjera koja usmjerava, nada koja otvara put i ljubav koja se konkretno očituje u služenju onima kojima je najpotrebnije. Renovabis kao most crkvene solidarnosti u Europi, svjedočanstvo i otvorenosti crkve čudesnom djelovanju Božjeg duha, čijom je snagom sve stvoreno i sve biva obnovljeno, moleći danas pred licem svemogućega. Emitte spiritum tuum, et creabuntur, et renovabis faciem tere. Pošalji duha svojega i obnovit ćeš lice zemlje. S oslonce na toj snazi Renovabis je pružanjem konkretne pomoći i potpore znak životnosti crkve također na području i odgoja i obrazovanja, kao i u raznim oblicima suradnje. Za naše sveučilište ova suradnja predstavlja most prema međunarodnoj prisutnosti i prepoznatljivosti našeg djelovanja i potvrda vrednota koje dijelimo s Renovabisom. Ich freue mich sehr, dass Thomas' Mutter Elisabeth mit uns heute da ist. Wir gratulieren ihr von ganzem Herzen und danken ihr für alles. Danke dir, Elisabeth, was du für Thomas getan hast und weiterhin tust und machst, sowie für seine Freunde aus Deutschland, die heute mit uns da sind. In einem Interview mit einem renommierten katholischen Portal in Kroatien am Vorabend von Weihnachten sagte Professor Schwartzu unter anderem: Unsere Aufgabe ist es, die Botschaft des Evangeliums so zu verkünden, dass sie die Menschen in ihrem Alltag erreicht. Das bedeutet nicht Anpassung um jeden Preis, sondern eine kreative und mutige Auseinandersetzung mit dem Glauben. Die Kirche muss Orte der Begegnung, des Dialogs und der Hoffnung bieten, gerade in einer Zeit, in der vielen Menschen nach Sinn und Orientierung suchen. Lieber Thomas, vielen Dank, dass du dies miterlebt und uns dazu ermutigt hast. Ich gratuliere dir herzlich zur Ehrendoktorwürde und freue mich sehr, dass du nun auch Teil unserer Universitätsgemeinschaft wirst. Ad multos annos vivas. Hvala vam lijepa.
Hvala vam, rektore Tanjiću. U ime zagrebačkog nadbiskupa metropolita i našeg velikog kancelara monsinjora Dražena Kutleše, prigodnu riječ održat će monsinjor Ivan Šaško, prvi rektor Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta. Izvolite.
Cijenjeni uzvanici, braćo i sestre, dragi prijatelji. Today in this occasion I have an extremely beautiful, simple and joyful mission to greet you all, congratulate and thank Professor Thomas Schwartz on behalf of our Archbishop of Zagreb, Dražen Kutleša, and the entire Archdiocese and share with you a few thoughts and impressions. Rado s vama dijelim trenutke ovoga svečanog akademskog čina, kao izaslanik našega zagrebačkog nadbiskupa i velikoga kancelara, monsinjora Dražena Kutleše, donoseći čestitke ponajprije tebi, dragi frater major, Tomas, vama, cijenjena gospođo Elizabet, majko slavljenika, vama suradnici i prijatelji doktora Schwartza, Zakladi Renovabis i tebi, draga sveučilišna zajednico Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta. Danas ovdje živimo ljepotu dara, živimo iskustvo uistinu čudesnih Božjih putova koji su isprepleteni i u ovome su nam zajedništvu ponuđeni da ih zadivljeno razmatramo. Nadovezujući se na riječi veleučenog gospodina rektora, i ja sam ovih dana povezivao vrijeme od prije više od 35 godina našega studentskog života u Rimu i današnju svečanost. Tako sam potražio godišnjak Papinskog zavoda Germanicum et Hungaricum, naš korespondentblatt. I to upravo ovaj broj koji je objavljen o 100. obljetnici izlaženja, a donosi događaje dijelom iz 1990. i iz prve polovine 1991. godine, po mnogo čemu prijelomnih godina za Hrvatsku. U kronici tih mjeseci nalaze se naša imena kao studenata, koja su mnogima od vas poznata. Fotografije lica pokazuju prilične promjene, ali ono što je ostalo nepromijenjeno jest duh koji nas trajno nadahnjuje i prati, a njegove tragove i plodove susrećemo i ovdje. Tako je baš u ovome broju zabilježeno da je 1990. u Rim na studij i u Zavod Germanicum došao i naš sadašnji rektor Željko Tanjić, gdje ga između ostalih dočekao sadašnji pročelnik odjela za komunikologiju, profesor Danijel Labaš. Godina 1990. za profesora Thomasa Schwartza, kao i za ovdje nazočnog biskupa Ivana Čurića, bila je godina prezbiterskog ređenja. Tomas je zaređen u Rimu u listopadu i zanimljivo je da je za svoje mladomisničko geslo izabrao riječi iz druge poslanice Korinčanima Caritas Christi urget nos. Kristova nas ljubav obuzima, potiče, tjera, a za slavlje svoje mlade mise izabrao je Rimsku crkvu, baziliku svete mučenice Cecilije. Upravo je ta bazilika tijekom nedavno zaključene jubilejske godine s posebnim naglaskom na nadi, bila mjesto na kojemu su hodočasnici razmatrali lik naučiteljice crkve i jedna od zaštitnica Europe, svete Hildegarde von Bingen. U njoj, koja je živjela prošireno benediktinsko geslo ora et labora et lege, moli, radi i uči, povezuje se mnoštvo vidika koji su i danas nezamjenjivi. Spominjem naše studentske dane u Rimu ne zbog naše osobne povijesti, nego zbog toga što je sve to šire od naših života, jer traje i živi čak i onda kada se čini da tako nešto ostaje u prošlosti. Mi smo samo nastavili ono što su živjeli drugi i prenosili nama, a mi nešto od toga prenosimo novomu naraštaju. Želio bih da našim studentima i profesorima i to bude nadahnuće da danas izgrađujete što šire zajedništvo u našoj Europi i u svijetu, stječete osobna poznanstva, učite jezike i posebice pazite na smisao tih poveznica koje su protkane Kristom i kršćanskom kulturom brige za bližnje. To pridonosi razumijevanju, otvaranju putova i pronalaženju odgovora na pitanja kao i lijeka za bolesti u sadašnjosti. Sowohl auf Kroatisch als auf Deutsch sprechen wir von der Muttersprache, der Sprache der Liebe und der Wahrheit. Diese Sprache weist uns dauerhaft an, Worte und Bedeutung, Sprache und Realität zu verbinden. Deshalb ist die Anwesenheit von Thomas Mutter hier mit uns schön und bedeutungsvoll. Today's lecture, Lectio Magistralis, by Professor Schwartz, will show how important it is to rediscover the meaning of words, because if their connection with reality is lost, then the entire possibility of dialogue and communication is put at risk. Papst Leo genau vor einer Woche hat gesagt, miteinander in Dialog zu treten, muss man sich über die Worte und die Konzepte, die sie repräsentieren, verständigen. Die Bedeutung der Worte wieder zu entdecken, ist möglicherweise eine der wichtigsten Herausforderungen unserer Zeit. Danas ćemo čuti puno pohvala, isticanje uspjeha i dobrih dijela. I treba biti tako. Jer živimo od dobra. Istodobno znamo da naš cilj nije nikakva zemaljska hvala, nego plodovi Kristove ljubavi koja nas obuzima i potiče. Lieber Thomas, dein Lebensweg zeigt, wie du orare, laborare et legere verbindest und Demut bewahrst. Ich schließe mit den Worten eines kroatischen und eines deutschen Dichters aus dem 19. Jahrhundert. Der erste sagt, oj budi svoj, al brat ti budi braći, i radi za svijet, al ne slušaj pljeska, i ljubi svijet, al ne nadaj se plaći, jer hvala ljudska, voda je vrh pjeska, u tvojoj svijesti hvala ti je trudu. Der andere schreibt andere Worte, aber mit demselben Geist. Es kann die Ehre dieser Welt dir keine Ehre geben. Was dich in Wahrheit hebt und hält, muss in dir selber lieben. Danas slavimo jer je Tomas prije nego li je postao doktor honoris causa pokazao da je učitelj kršćanske ljubavi, nositelj doktorata Caritatis causa. Also nicht nur Doktor honoris causa, sondern auch Doktor Caritatis causa. Herzliche Glückwünsche, čestitam i hvala lijepa svima.
Hvala monsignoru Šašku. Prije središnjeg dijela akademskog čina prepustit ćemo se glazbenom ugođaju. Samoborski kvartet koji čine Lara Rimac-Dražina, Ivan Mužanić, Filip Vitko i Stin Lebar izvest će nam skladbu hrvatskoga skladatelja Luke Sorkočevića, simfoniju broj 3 u D duru. Izvolite. Ovaj je pljesak bio priznanje i zahvala za sjajnu izvedbu. Pozivam predsjednika povjerenstva Senata Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta za dodjelu počasnog doktorata Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta profesoru Schwartzu, profesora doktora Gordana Črpića, koji će izreći prigodnu laudaciju.
Poštovani članovi akademske zajednice, cijenjene uzvanice i uzvanici, dame i gospodo. Okupljeni smo danas da bismo s dubokim osjećajem poštovanja i zahvalnosti kao akademska zajednica odali priznanje istaknutom teologu, akademiku, promicatelju načela socijalnog nauka crkve, svećeniku, profesoru doktoru Thomasu Schwartzu, ravnatelju Zaklade Renovabis Njemačke biskupske konferencije. Profesor Schwartz svojim je znanstvenim i stručnim radom istraživao, propitivao i dosljedno promicao vrednote kršćanske i poslovne etike, ali je svojim djelovanjem te osobnom brigom i zauzimanjem za potrebite u društvu na životan način utjelovio vrijednosti, odgovornosti, pravednosti i solidarnosti. Profesor dr. Thomas Schwartz rođen je 31. svibnja 1964. godine u Landstullu u Njemačkoj. Nakon mature započeo je 1984. godine filozofsko-teološki studij na sveučilištu u Münstru. Nastavio ga je na sveučilištu u Augsburgu, te potom na papinskom sveučilištu Gregorijana u Rimu. Za svećenika biskupije Augsburg 1990. godine zaredio ga je biskup, kasnije kardinal Karl Lehmann. Doktorirao je 2001. godine iz područja moralne teologije i teološke etike na Teološkom fakultetu sveučilišta u Freiburgu s disertacijom o savjesti o spisima svetog Tome Akvinskoga. Pastoralnu službu obnašao je u raznolikosti pastoralnog poslanja, uključujući službu župnog vikara u Meningu kraj Augsburga 1991. godine, ravnatelja katoličkog sveučilišnog pastorala u Augsburgu 1999. godine, a od 2010. godine do 2021. godine bio je župnik župe svetog Mihaela u Meringu. Njegova akademska karijera obuhvaća brojne nastavničke aktivnosti na području moralne teologije te poslovne i korporativne etike na raznim sveučilištima i visokim školama od 1995. godine. Godine 2005. imenovan je profesorom primijenjene etike na sveučilištu primijenjenih znanosti u Augsburgu, a 2014. godine djeluje kao profesor za poslovnu i korporativnu etiku na sveučilištu u Augsburgu. Kao gostujući profesor za poslovnu etiku predavao je na sveučilištu u Bergamu u Italiji 2015. godine. Od 2016. godine također je duhovni pratitelj katoličkog njemačkog saveza žene, Katholischer Deutscher Frauenbund u biskupiji Augsburg. Od listopada 2021. godine profesor dr. Thomasu Schwartzu obnaša dužnost glavnog izvršnog direktora i predsjednika uprave Zaklade Renovabis, solidarne akcije njemačkih katolika za pomoć ljudima u crkvi u srednjoj i istočnoj Europi. Redovit je član Europske akademije znanosti i umjetnosti, član je upravnih odbora nekoliko uglednih institucija i tijela, uključujući komisiju Justitie et Pax Njemačke biskupske konferencije, Katoličku službu za akademsku razmjenu i zakladu Maksimilijan Kolbe. Na poseban poziv Pape Franje bio je član biskupske sinode o sinodalnosti 2023. i 2024. godine. Autor je brojnih znanstvenih i stručnih publikacija, sudionik televizijskih emisija u kojima je s astrofizičarem Haraldom Lešom raspravljao o teološkim i filozofskim temama. Kako u kratkom vremenu najbolje oslikati ukupni doprinos profesora Schwartza? Smatram da najprije valja ocrtati kontekst u kom profesor djeluje kako bismo cjelovitije mogli sagledati i vrednovati njegovo djelovanje. Mi, da se poslužim pojmom Thomasa Kuhna, živimo u vremenu krize normalne znanosti. Ta je kriza očita već od sredine 20. stoljeća. Naime, model znanosti koji je razvijen u 19. stoljeću i koji je usmjeren na redukciju i parcijalizaciju znanja i znanosti počeo je pokazivati znakove slabosti već sredinom 20. stoljeća. Od tada se traga za modelom koji bi iznjedrio novu paradigmu znanosti. Možemo reći da je razbijen konceptualni okvir u kojem je mislivo ono što nam se danas događa. Klasični etički modeli nisu davali odgovore na pitanja genske tehnologije, umjetne inteligencije i drugih novih područja znanstvenog napretka. Duhovna praznina koja je nastala u onomičnom društvu pokušala se napose u drugoj polovici 20. stoljeća supsumirati pravom. Sve se kušalo propisati i standardizirati, no već krajem stoljeća vidljivo je da pravo nema samostojeće snage koja bi bila dostatna da zadrži imploziju duhovno ispražnjenih zapadnih društava. Osim toga, bitan vidik koji je godinama bio ignoriran jest onaj socijalni. U samozadovoljstvu države blagostanja previdjelo se i nije se htjelo vidjeti da u takvoj državi postoje ljudi koji su potrebni, koji su siromašni, duhovno, ali i materijalno. Svojevrsni odgovor na to stanje, na krizu moderne, pokušao se pronaći u modelu postmoderne, kasne moderne, druge moderne, kako je već nazivaju pojedini autori. No, koliko vidimo, ta nas paradigma nije uspjela uvesti u neki novi horizont koji bi uspostavio vrijeme normalne znanosti, da se poslužimo opet ovim kumovskim pojmom. Ono što nam je postmoderno namrla i s čim se danas mučimo jest znanost u kojoj je istina postala epistemološki i metodološki irelevantna. To nam čini nemogući svaki dijalog, te se kao glavna metoda društvenog komuniciranja javlja polemika. Što u takvom znanstvenom, misaonom okruženju može jedan teolog? Može se zatvoriti u okvire akademske teologije, raspravljati pitanja koja zanimaju nekoliko kolega i ostvariti svoju akademsku karijeru. Ali može krenuti drugim putem, zaroniti u životnu stvarnost konkretnih zajednica, osluškivati nestrukturirana, slabo ili nejasno artikulirana pitanja i probleme ljudi u njihovim stvarnim životnim prilikama i pristati na izazov da ta pitanja jasnije artikulira te pokuša dati, ponekad i mucajući, odgovore koji teže koherentnosti, sistematičnosti, strukturiranju nekog kozmosa iz anomičnog kaosa. Profesor Schwartz odlučio se upravo istraživati to zahtjevno, rubno područje životnih situacija pojedinaca, zajednica, društava i naroda u novim okolnostima nakon raspada komunističkog sustava. Istraživanja izgradnje ranjenih zajednica u okruženju novih repozicioniranja centara moći, u okruženju koje nam diktiraju nove tehnologije, ostavštini koju nam je namrla postmoderna u nemoći prava da nadomjesti duhovnu i vrijednosnu ispražnjenost zapadnih društava. Što se tu može učiniti? Uzmemo li u obzir da su istina i pravo postali irelevantni u suvremenim društvima, postavlja se pitanja koji je mogući izlaz iz situacije u kojoj smo se našli. Profesor Schwartz izlaz traži u istraživanju dobra. Svaka etika propituje neko dobro. Teološki bi se to reklo vratiti se Bogu, apsolutnom dobru i izvoru dobrote i iz te perspektive pomagati zajednicama da se izgrađuju, uspostavljaju funkcionalno, egzistencijalne i normativne sustave koji neće biti nametnuti izvana, već izgrađeni iznutra, dinamikom kojom ih ta konkretna zajednica može graditi. To je velika uloga zaklada poput one Renovabis, jer u vremenu u kojemu živimo važno je ulagati u izgradnju ljudskih, ali i materijalnih kapaciteta pojedinih zajednica i društava. Ne živi čovjek samo u kruhu, govori Gospodin. U nekim trenucima od svakoga od nas zahtijeva se herojsko držanje, herojski mod djelovanja. No mi ljudi ne živimo samo, pa ni pretežito od herojskih čina, već od svagdana, u kojima imamo svoje potrebe koje, ako nisu zadovoljene, nameću se kao primarne. Zajednice pogođene infrastrukturnim i materijalnim nedostacima postaju ranjive na razne demagoške ponude lakih rješenja složenih situacija. Tu bismo mogli smjestiti traganje profesora Schwartza u njegovom znanstvenom istraživanju i stručnome radu, koji kuša spojiti teoriju s iskustvenom stvarnošću u dijalektičkom propitivanju stvarnosti, u motrenju iste te u traganju za modelima i rješenjima koji će izgrađivati promatrane zajednice. Velika dobrobit toga rada je traganje za paradigmom koja bi razriješila proturječja koja su nam ostavile moderna i postmoderna. Proturječja koja nisu samo, pa ne ni prvenstveno, čisto intelektualne teoretske naravi koja bi se iscrpljivala u akademskom prostoru. To su proturječja koja duboko prožimaju naše živote, iz kojih se razvija nasilje, autoritarnost, demagogija, opasna previranja u obiteljima i u društvima. Budući da je profesor Schwartz odabrao ovaj herojski mot istraživanja na granici i granice, iznimna nam je čast i zadovoljstvo da smo, podupirući inicijativu Sveučilišnog odjela za sociologiju Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta, kao povjerenstvo Senatu Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta, mogli podastrti obrazloženo mišljenje i predlog da profesoru Thomasu Schwartzu dodijeli počasni doktorat. Vjerujem da će ovaj čin naše zahvalnosti i akademskog priznanja biti mnogima poticaj za nova propitivanja i nastojanja u izgradnji društva koje će uvijek umjeti prepoznati potrebite u slojevitosti njihovih potreba. Hvala.
Hvala vam, profesore Črpiću, na riječima kojima ste nam predstavili profesora Schwartza i njegovo akademsko, pastoralno i društveno angažirano djelovanje. Cijenjeni uzvanici, slijedi svečani čin dodjele počasnog doktorata. Na temelju odluke Senata Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta o dodjeli počasnog doktorata Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta od 14. listopada 2025. godine, rektor profesor dr. Željko Tanjić proglasit će profesora doktora Thomasa Schwartza počasnim doktorom Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta. Molim profesora doktora Antu Crnčevića, prorektora za kvalitetu, identitet i poslanje Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta, da pročita diplomu počasnog doktorata. Prorektore, izvolite.
Magnus Cancelarius Dražen Kutleša, arhiepiskopus Zagrabiensis. Et rector Željko Tanjić, professor ordinarius, pronunciant. Senatum Universitatis Studiorum Catholicae Croatice in sessione sua die 4º mensis octobris anni bismillesimi vicesimi quinti. Commissionis relatione approbata, in qua professor Gordan Črpić, prorector Universitatis Studiorum Catholicae Croatice preses, et professor Peter Schallenberg, Academia Paderbornensis, et professor Nicolaus Zajc, Universitas Ludovico Maximilianea Monacensis, Facultas Administrationis Negotiorum, et professor Mariana Kompes, Universitas Studiorum Catholica Croatica, Catedra Teologie, et professor Petra Palić, Universitas Studiorum Catholica Croatica, Departmentum Sociologie, membra fuerunt, decrevisse et statuisse, reverendum dominum professorem Thomas Schwartz, merere titulum academicum doctor honoris causa Universitatis Studiorum Catholicae Croatice. Reverendus Dominus, professor Thomas Schwartz, sacerdos insignis ac vir doctus, professor etice apud Universitatem Augustanam et peritus in questionibus etice negocialis et in doctrina sociali ecclesiae. Fundationis Renovabis Conferentiae Episcoporum Germanicorum director diligens, ob magnum contributum ad progressionem scientiae theologice, presertim doctrine socialis ecclesiae, ob indefessum opus et auxilium in justitia sociali promovenda edificandaque interis Europae medie et orientalis, ob peritiam suam in coniugendo pro bono comuni excellentiam scientificam et solicitudinem Christianam, doctor honoris causa, creatur, proclamatur, et renunciator. In cuius rei testimonium hoc diploma rite subscriptum et universitatis studiorum Catholicae Croatice sigillo munitum dedimus. Datum Zagrabie, die 6º mensis Januari, anni bismillesimi vicesimi sexti. Profesor Željko Tanić, rektor Universitatis Studiorum, et Dražen Kutleša, arhiepiskopus Zagrabiensis Magnus Cancellarius.
Ovime svečano proglašavam profesora doktora Thomasa Schwartza počasnim doktorom Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta i predajem mu znak doktorske časti, medalju počasnih doktora Hrvatskog katoličkog sveučilišta.
Našem novom počasnom doktoru čestitat će rektor, prorektori te članovi povjerenstva. Ostale uzvanike molimo da to učine po završetku svečanog akademskog čina. Prije zahvalnog govora našeg slavljenika, kvartet će izvesti skladbu Ludviga van Beethovena napisanu za gudački kvartet u F-duru. Izvolite. slijedi lekcio magistralis našeg počasnog doktora Thomasa Schwartza pod naslovom Staro vino zadržava dobar okus i u novim mjehovima. Značaj socijalnog nauka katoličke crkve suočenog s višestrukim krizama i izazovima suvremenoga svijeta. Gospodine počasni doktore našega sveučilišta, izvolite.
Your Excellencies, Your Magnificence, Rector Professor Tanic, dear members of the University Management and Administration, dear professors, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it is with great gratitude and deep appreciation that I accept the honorary doctorate awarded to me today by the Catholic University of Croatia. My sincere thanks go to the University Management, the Academic Senate, and all those who made and prepared this decision. I consider this award a great honor and a sign of trust. I'm particularly grateful that this honor is being bestowed upon me by a university with which I have had close professional and institutional ties for several years. I have had the privilege to teaching here and participating in academic discussions that have enriched my own thinking. At the same time, a reliable and growing cooperation between the Catholic University of Croatia and Renovabis has developed during this time, for which I have been jointly responsible in my role as Chief Executive Officer. Renovabis sees as a bridge between the church, academia, and social practice in Central, Eastern, and Southeastern Europe. In this sense, the cooperation with this university is an expression of a common concern to combine academic reflection with concrete responsibility and to meet the social, ethical, and cultural challenges of our time, not only analytically, but also in solidarity. I consider the fact that this connection is now visible in an academic setting to be a special recognition of this joint work. I accept with great humility the recognition today of my decades of work in science and teaching, particularly in the field of economic and social ethics and in questions of scientific theory. This award is not least a tribute to the many companions in science, the church, and practice who have supported and shaped my work. I would like to express my sincere thanks to all of them. I am particularly happy that my dear mother, Elisabeth Schwartz, is also able to attend today's ceremony here in Zagreb. Without her, I would not be here. I owe her many, and my recently deceased father, Wilhelm Schwartz, my love and knowledge, and my openness to addressing the challenges facing society and church, and so much more. Mom, I love you. Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a time in which crises no longer follow one another but overlap. Climate change and social inequality, technological upheavals and caused by artificial intelligence, geopolitical tensions, war, and the creeping loss of trust in democratic institutions are not occurring one after the other, but simultaneously. This simultaneity creates a new quality of uncertainty. It challenges not only our political ability to govern, but also our ethical orientation. At such moments, it becomes clear that societies fail not only because of a lack of solutions, but also because of a lack of standards. Technical innovation, economic dynamisms, and geopolitical power can provide answers, but they do not answer the fundamental question of why and what for we act. It is precisely at this point that Catholic social teaching gains renewed relevance. Catholic social teaching is not a historical set of rules for past social orders. It is an ethical system of interpretation developed out for the conviction that human beings are more than producers, consumers, or geopolitical factors. Its basic principles, the inviolable dignity of every person, the common good, solidarity and subsidiarity, are not tied to specific eras, but are particularly relevant where orders become fragile and things that were once taken for granted break down. The multiple crises of our present days act as a magnifying glass. They reveal where economic efficiency is played off against human dignity, where technological feasibility threatens to supplant moral responsibility, and where national interests undermine the global common good. Catholic social teaching contradicts this logic, not with simple answers, but with a sophisticated anthropology. Human beings are ends in themselves, never means. Responsibility is indivisible, and freedom remains hollow without a commitment to justice. Against this background, the following speech is intended as an invitation to taste the old wine of this social teaching anew. Not out of nostalgia, but out of the insight that, especially in times of radical change, proven ethical standards unfold their true maturity. Catholic social teaching does not offer a ready-made crisis plan, but it does offer a compass, a GPS. And perhaps that is precisely the kind of guidance we need today more urgently than ever before. I had to give this introduction to my magister lecture. I don't know why, but I gave it now in order to fulfill the wish of the university management. Vaša ekscelencije, veločenje poštovani, cijenje kolegici i kolege, draže studentice i studenti, dame i gospodi. Velika mi je i osobita čast primiti ovo visoko akademsko priznanje na ovome mjestu i ovome svečanom trenutku u nazočnosti tako ugledni kolegica i kolega, poštovani učitelja i dragi prijatelja. And forgive me, I will not bother you now with a bad Croatian, but with a bad English, so we have something in common. It is an overwhelming honor to receive this high academic distinction in place and on this festive occasion in the presence of such esteemed colleagues, revered teachers, and dear friends. Dear friends, an honorary doctorate is never just a retrospective recognition of past achievements. Rather, it's a mandate, a call to continue one's work in the various fields in which one is active and to place one's actions in the service of the common good. And in this place and at this university, allow me to add, in the service of the Church. The choice of topic for this acceptance address, old wine tastes good in new wineskins too, may seem provocative at first glance. The metaphor comes from the Holy Scriptures, more precisely from the Synoptic Gospels. There, Jesus warns against pouring new wine into old, brittle wineskins, as the fermentation process would cause the rigid containers to burst. He called for a radical renewal, to pour new wine into new wineskins. Our title, however, deliberately reverses this warning. In doing so, I want to make it clear that the old wine, which I would like to equate here with the timeless moral truths of Catholic social teaching, can once again come into its own in its true quality through the epochal crisis of the 21st century, the new wineskins. And the multiple crises of our time make the core of Catholic social teaching even more necessary and its contents even more palatable. I'm well aware of the fragmentary nature of these remarks. I voluntarily expose myself to the otium of incompleteness for the sake of the intellectual horizon that these remarks are intended to open up. The old wine is the essence of Catholic social teaching, not a dusty handbook of economic recommendations with moral impetus, but a living organism of ethical reference systems in the sense of an Aristotelian organon, whose foundation is the inalienable dignity of human beings as images of God. In view of the manifold challenges of the present, we could even speak of a kind of Catholic social teaching 2.0, in the sense that we want to use this neologism to understand the dynamic, adaptive application of these principles to a world that radically deviates from the assumptions of the encyclical Rerum Novarum of 1891. The choice of the name of Pope Francis' successor, Leo XIV, in deliberate reference to Leo XIII, signals the strategic parallelism. Just as the Church provided guidance in the age of industrialization, it is now speaking out in the midst of all-driven transformation and the ecological crisis. The unique value of Catholic social teaching lies in its robust universal anthropology, which predates contemporary liberal democracies and today's global institutions. This foundation enables the Church's social ethics to engage in systemic criticism, for example, of the deification of the market, which political actors are often unable to do due to their short-term mandates. Catholic social teaching 2.0 thus proves that to be an anchor of stability and a globally effective normative system that not only provides technocratic solutions, but also places universal human nature at the center of political and economic considerations. The Church also confirms this need for a renewed approach to contemporary human and social problems. Significantly, the Vatican's latest reflections on the ethics of artificial intelligence are entitled Antiqua et Nova, the application of old and new wisdom. And Pope Leo XIV himself, right at the beginning of his pontificate, not only addressed this issue, but also the other challenges that characterize the multiple crises of our present time and announced answers to them based on the tradition of the Catholic social teaching and our Christian responsibility for the world. This underpins the central thesis of my lecture today. The principles of Catholic social teaching are not outdated, but are maturing in the new context of technological and ecological crisis into a moral imperative that is radical in the theological sense and relevant to global politics. First, the eternal wines, the four basic principles of Catholic social teaching as a moral reference system. Dear friends, Catholic social teaching is traditionally based on four pillars rooted in the ethics of Thomas Aquinas and his view of human beings as ens sociale, social beings. These principles form the indestructible framework that can provide stability in the storms of the Anthropocene, as our era is often called. First, human dignity, dignitas personae. This principle is the transcendent starting point. Every single human being, regardless of their origin or abilities, has an inviolable value that cannot be relativized. This is the unsurmountable common thread of all social ethical reflection, the condition of possibility, the conditio sine qua non of ethical reflection in our time. In theological interpretation, it is based on the idea that humans are created in God's image, so that one can say here, only the unavailable can make human unavailable. Second, common good, bonum commune. The common good, understood as the totality of those conditions of social life that enable the members of a community to achieve their own God-given calling to perfection. Thomas Aquinas calls this the plenitudo essendi, more comprehensively and more easily. In recent discourse, it is often regarded as a derived principle of solidarity, but it always stands in necessary tension with the individual good. Third, solidarity, solidaritas. The duty of mutual responsibility that transcends individual or group interests. In the face of global crisis, the principle must evolve more from a vague attitude to a binding action. However, analysis of modern society shows that solidarity is currently in danger of degenerating into a container term that can be filled with almost anything depending on the intention, almost like the term sustainability. I have never heard so many times quoting the word sustainability that it becomes banal. A Catholic social doctrine 2.0 must empty this container and fill it with concrete, measurable commitments. And fourth, subsidiarity, subsidium. Finally, this principle protects the autonomy of smaller units and states, that larger entities should not do what smaller ones can do. That is also valuable for Greenland, dear friends. It is a federal principle of assistance. In my opinion, it is even the foundation of solidarity. Solidarity can and should only become effective and active where subsidiarity reaches its limits. Catholic social teaching must therefore be able to show in our multiple global crises how this principle must also work upwards to secure the global common good where individual states fail. The common good in the stress test, the eco-social transformation. I'm convinced that the greatest challenge of our time for the classical bonum commune is the ecological crisis. It forces us to radically expand the common good. It is not longer just about harmony within human society, but about caring for our common house, integral ecology, as Pope Francis calls for in Laudato Si. The ecological crisis is inextricably linked to the social question, because the most severe effects of the environmental damage associated with economic development are suffered by the poorest. Their focus on quick returns by economic powers often goes hand in hand with ridiculing and mocking those voices that rise up in defense of the environment. A recent example of this was US President Donald Trump's appearance before the United Nations General Assembly. I will spare us all from commenting on this speech. In any case, analysis of the interrelationships reveals that increasing socioeconomic inequality is not only a consequence of the climate crisis, but also a driver of it. The polarization of income and wealth creates resistance to necessary drastic climate protection measures. Those who own a lot, for example, fly more often and emit more, while the less wealthy are particularly burdened by measures such as carbon oxide pricing. The eco-social transformation must therefore be understood as an integrated climate and distribution policy. Ecological sustainability and social cohesion are not contradictory, but are necessarily interrelated. Advocating for these issues always results in mutual synergy effects. The climate justice as a distribution problem, the burden of ecological debt. Dear friends, in the context of climate change, solidarity is transforming from an attitude of willingness to take responsibility to an obligation to pay off debts. I do not understand the concept of debt here in a purely monetary term. The dicastery for promoting integral human development has clearly stated that justice begins with the recognition of the ecological debt caused primarily by industrialized countries. It is therefore not solely or even primarily a financial obligation, but rather an ethical relationship problem. The concretization of this debt obligation requires a global and intergenerational perspective of justice. The German Ethics Council, for example, provides clear, robust criteria for the secular application of the principle of solidarity for the equitable distribution of burdens and obligations in the fight against climate change. It names 3 of these and concretizes each with a question. First, contributing cause. Who has contributed most to climate change, both historically and currently? And the answer is primarily the global north. Second, capacity. Who can effectively implement the necessary measures for mitigation and adaptation? The answer is the industrialized countries, we. And third, benefit. Who has profited most from climate-damaging activities to date? Also, the countries of global north and the autocracies of the Arabian Peninsula. For both Pope Francis and the German Ethics Council, the ethical consequence is to opt for the eco-poor, the needs of those people who are most affected by climate change and who are furthest from the minimum requirements for a good life must be given priority. And then comes another form of responsibility, the intergenerational responsibility. This is a postulate of a grandchild suitability. In view of the ecological crisis, the principle of subsidiarity is also undergoing a temporal expansion. In our concern for our common home, we are not only shaping the present, but also acting as stewards of the future. Moral theologians and ethicists postulate the principle of grandchild suitability in this context. Grandchild suitability. This means that climate action must be designed in such a way that it secures the livelihood of future generations. This inevitably brings to mind the newly formulated ecological categorical imperative that Hans Jonas formulated in his 1979 work, The Imperative of Responsibility. I quote, "Act so that the effects of your actions are compatible with the permanence of genuine human life on earth." Or, to put it negatively, act so that the effects of your actions are not destructive to the future possibility of such life. Quote end. At the same time, it is emphasized that the blanket global removal of boundaries from postulates of justice, the demand to do everything for everyone, runs the risk of leading to mere overload and trivialization of the demands and obligations are not specified for specific actors. Catholic social teaching must indeed demand that global responsibility does not lead to an exoneration of national actors, but it is understood as a hierarchy of duties. However, this is not to be equated with the thesis of US Vice President J.D. Vance, who speaks of a graduated responsibility with regards to the migration issue and attempts to take the Church Father Augustine as a witness to. Even before his election as Pope, the then Cardinal and Augustine expert Robert Prevost had contradicted them. There are no gradations in moral obligations, but priorization is possible. The demand for a society that creates new perspectives for a good life in a sustainable and climate-neutral society without further growth in consumption and resource use demonstrate the profound alliance between secular ethics and Catholic social teaching. This is particularly evident in our shared criticism of a materialism that forgets humanity. The ecological crisis in which humanity finds itself today worldwide may therefore force us to turn away from purely quantitative growth models. The so-called sufficiency economy represents an economic model that is more oriented toward qualitative growth. It asks the fundamental question, how much is enough? How much is enough? Sufficiency raises the questions of how much people need in order to lead a good life that conserves resources. This involves much more than just using the most efficient technologies possible. People adopt a sufficient lifestyle when they consciously base their behavior on what is really necessary for a good life and not on what is maximally conceivable. In this way, they protect the environment and enjoy a better quality of life. The focus on the essentials. This does not mean doing without, but rather consciously choosing, sharing, or exchanging. And in this sense, sufficiency or frugality may be a response to a challenge of the global ecological crisis and the associated growing inequality that is deeply rooted in the principles of Catholic teaching and social teaching. So, the challenge of reason, artificial intelligence, and digital sovereignty. The technological revolution of artificial intelligence poses a challenge to anthropological and social structures that is as fundamental as that posed by the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. At that time, the Church responded with Rerum Novarum, and today with the comprehensive statements of AI ethics. Catholic social teaching has always positioned itself as a third way beyond capitalism and socialism, respecting the right to private property while at the same time obliging the state to safeguard the common good. The digital platform economy and automation are renewing the structural question in a transformed guise. AI has the potential to increase productivity and enable more innovative tasks. However, the danger lies in forcing workers to adapt to the speed and demands of machines rather than technology serving workers. That is the problem. Humans lose their self-purpose in the Kantian sense and become mere means for unbridled growth, managed not by humans, but by machines and algorithms. The modern form of exploitation and alienation violates human dignity, which is at the heart of Catholic social teaching. And the Holy See's most recent note on this subject, Antiqua et Nova from 2025, draws a clear red line based on theological anthropology. The central argument is that artificial intelligence may only complement human intelligence. Replacing human intelligence, especially in existential or spiritual areas, would enslave humanity and serve as a substitute for God. So as ChatGPT answered to the question, exists God? Does God exist? Finally, yes. Finally, yes. That was the answer of ChatGPT. The theological criticism is directed against technocratic hubris. The Vatican document explicitly warns against deepfakes, data protection risks, and technocratic control, in which large companies can exert significant social and political influence and manipulate consciences and democratic processes. We see this in the United States in the moment. In this context, another tension in the principle of technologically based emphasis of human dignity in Antiqua et Nova comes into play. While modern AI systems can recognize patterns and perform analytical or creative tasks through machine learning, deep learning, they can never assume moral authorship or responsibility. Catholic social teaching, therefore, demands that AI must not pursue the sole goal of profit maximization or the gradual replacement of humans in the workplace. The debate about the protection of copyright in AI-generated works reflects the deeper philosophical concern about human authorships and as an expression of human dignity. When AI systems take over task and decision-making authority, the classic categories of human work become blurred. The protection of human creative achievement through an adapted legal framework thus becomes the economic reflection of the demand for the protection of moral autonomy. Pope Leo's warning that advanced AI programs could become capable of communicating with each other, others outside the control of their programmers, and influencing human existence underscores the urgency of a preventive ethics that ensures complete control by humans. Not only the church magisterium, but also contemporary theological approaches are addressing this issue. Many authors consider computer science and programming in the context of the mandate to create, Adam naming the animals. They emphasize the responsible dominion of humans over technology, not the dominion of technology over humans. Therefore, we need an ethic of algorithms. The German Ethics Council also comes to similar conclusions from a secular, human rights-based perspective, emphasizing the irreplaceability of humans in critical functions. The key question in the ethics of artificial intelligence is whether these systems expand or diminish the conditions for responsible action and human authorship. The assessment must always be context, application, and person-specific. in areas that affect mental or physical integrity, such as medicine or psychotherapy, AI must not replace humans. Accordingly, the German Psychological Society clearly rejects AI systems as a substitute for psychotherapy. Furthermore, the algorithmic creation of content, as practiced by social media, poses considerable risk to users' freedom of thought. The personalization of content through algorithms shapes the flow of information and can contribute to the spread of false content, which impairs the ability to form free, informed opinions. Ultimately, the challenge is to develop AI systems in such a way that they serve the well-being of individuals and humanity as a whole. In this context, the Rome Call for AI initiative, co-initiated by the Church, serves as a policy tool to promote algorithmics that puts human centrality in the forefront. The challenge and the challenges of the present day are leading to a remarkable convergence between church social teaching and secular ethical approaches taken by committees and think tanks. This agreement on core demands once again underscores the universal rational basis of the principles of the Catholic social teaching. And now to the fourth point. The third major challenge, which is the fourth point now, is the diagnosis that the world order has been thrown into disarray. This applies not only to the weakness of nation states, which today are sometimes at the mercy of economic global players, or as has become increasingly clear in recent years, are being moved back and forth by other economically and militarily powerful states as geopolitical figures on the chessboard of a so-called multipolar world order. We can see this in the moment, not only with Greenland, with Venezuela, with Iran, with Ukraine, and so on. In his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis describes this phenomenon as a crisis of fraternity, manifested in the failure of global cooperation and growing indifference. The encyclical provides a sharp, sociologically grounded analysis of power relations. The 21st century is characterized by a weakening of nation-states. The reason for this lies in the fact that the transnational power of the economic and financial sectors tends to dominate the political level. This diagnosis leads to the application of the parable of the Good Samaritan on a global level. The Pope criticizes those who hold important social positions but carelessly pass by the wounded globally community and are unwilling to devote time and resources to the common good. We see this on the lack of US aid in the moment. $65 billion are away. Who helps the people now? The world is far from getting rid of the adjective unequal. Although globalization has enabled an unprecedented increase in global living standards, there have been significant losers, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, who suffer from poor governance, lack of capital, and unstable legal systems, and have been unable to participate fairly in the global division of labor. In view of this global market and institutional failure, Catholic social teaching calls for a radical change in global governance. The demand for effective world authority, regulated by law, is probably the most radical new wineskin into which the old wine is poured. This demand is the logical, albeit revolutionary, consequence of the principle of subsidiarity. Subsidiarity, not solidarity. At the lower level, the nation state is overwhelmed by transnational problems. The highest level must intervene to secure the global common good. That is a demand of subsidiarity. World authority is the ethically necessary subsidy for saving the world order. The principle of subsidiarity in its original form is understood as a protective principle for smaller entities against encroaching higher authorities. However, in view of the erosion of global governance by the power politics of major players, the principle undergoes a decisive transformation in Catholic social teaching. It becomes a principle of empowerment for effective international institutions. The encyclical calls for reformed and more efficiently organized international institutions to be empowered to impose sanctions so that the concept of the family of nations can really bite. This authority must be dedicated to the elimination of hunger and poverty and secure defense of fundamental human rights. Clear legal boundaries are needed to prevent power from being co-opted by only a few countries, which would limit the subsidiarity and freedom of weaker nations. The theological call for a new ethic for international relations is supported by think tanks in the field of global governance. They diagnose that the post-war institution, like United Nations, International Monetary Fund, World Bank, are outdated and no longer reflect today's power relations. The structures of the 21st century require a radical transformation of multilateral structures, which will inevitably entail a symmetrical shift in the international economy, away from unbridled market freedom toward an alternative, responsible political economic model. The work of international forums such as G20 demonstrates the need for multilateral dialogue to promote strong, sustainable, and balanced growth. Think tanks, such as the Simon Institute for Long-Term Governance, focus on promoting international cooperation in the management of transformative technologies such as AI, demonstrating the urgent need for global governance structures that transcend national interests. From a theological perspective, the crisis of world order is a modern-day story of Babel. Sin was understood by the church fathers as the destruction of the unity of the human race, as fragmentation and as division. Redemption and salvation appear precisely as the restoration of this unity in which we come together again. World authority is thus the political and institutional manifestation of the theological goal of restoring unity in the we. I see a final and particularly dramatic arena for the resilience-promoting power of Catholic social teaching and the need for its renewed emphasis in the resistance to the emergence of violent imperialist tendencies in numerous states. Anyone who has been following the news in recent years, and we can admit days and weeks, can sense it. The world smells of gunpowder again. The horizon, which we thought was free of imperial shadows after 1989, is darkening once more. Old maps are being painted over with new borders. In some social media, Greenland became already American, as if nothing had been learned from history. Humanity is stumbling once again over its own hubris. This gloomy scenario shows how urgent is that Catholic social teaching remains the moral compass of our time. For it recognizes the value of peace, not as a political option, but as a theological axiom. Peace, pacem in terris, reminds us is not the silence of weapons, but order in truth, in justice, love, and freedom. But it is precisely this order that is at stake today. The brutal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine by the Russian Federation has shaken the foundation of international law. It is not only an attack on a neighboring country, but also on a moral memory of Europe. What we are witnessing is more than a military conflict. It is the renaissance of an imperial mindset that views nations as chess pieces and human lives as collateral damage. Social teaching is very clear on this point. Violence to enforce hegemonic claims is incompatible with human dignity. No geopolitical interests, no historical sense of mission justifies the blood of innocence. Nothing justifies the blood of innocence. The principles of social teaching, personality, solidarity, common good, are not abstract vocabulary in this context, but explosive ethical arguments for peace against the cynicism of power. And there is no holy war, there's only a holy peace. Nothing else is holy. Storms are also brewing in East Asia and in the Middle East. The People's Republic of China, economically interconnected globally, but politically authoritarian and closed, demonstrates its power through intimidation, especially toward the Democratic Island Republic of Taiwan. There, where a small nation with impressive civil courage is defending its freedom, we see how endangered the idea of self-determination has become. And we see this also in other parts of our world. It's no question by now, even Iceland thinks to become a member of the European Union. Because after Greenland, next island could be Iceland. Catholic social teaching, which has always linked the right of peoples to self-determination with the responsibility for solidarity, offers guidance here. And it has offered also in Croatia 30 years ago, when this courageous country decided to be an autonomous state. And I'm happy that I can follow this development of your state to a headstone of the European Union in the last 30 years. So, not every democracy is perfect, but no autocracy is morally superior. It is the task of the international community to protect the freedom of the weak, not only with words, but with deeds that are in accordance with international law. Global think tanks, from the Carnegie Endowment to the German Institute for International and Security Affairs, warn of a multipolar confrontation in which economic dependencies lead to moral silence. Social teaching, however, insists that ethics cannot be exported or imported. It must be lived. And yet, the integrity of Christian ethics also includes the ability to engage in self-criticism. Thus, while we fully understand Israel's existential security situation and fully recognize its inalienable right to exist, we cannot remain silent where military measures in the Gaza Strip threaten to lose all sense of proportion and moderation. After the horrific terrorist attack of the October 7th, 2023, which was nothing less than a crime against humanity, Israel faces a tragedy. It must defend itself, and in doing so, it must not lose itself. Let us pray that President Trump's latest peace plan will successfully bring about peace. Right now, I spoke 2 days ago with the Patriarch Pizzaballa. We don't see still this peace, but let's hope and pray for it. In the face of these multiple crises, Catholic social teaching calls us to adopt the rare attitude which Pope Francis describes as the, I quote, courage of humility, quote end, the courage to seek justice without falling into self-righteousness. These global areas of tension, from Kiev to Gaza, from Taipei to Moscow, from Venezuela to Greenland, show how necessary a renewed social teaching is. One that understands the ethics of peace not as an afterword to violence, but to a preface of humanity. Perhaps we may hope Catholic social teaching is these days the quiet but persistent whisper of reason. Peace is not the end of war, it is its opposite. Therefore, Catholic teaching as a compass for the Anthropocene. The systemic crisis of the present, amid, proves its extraordinary and necessary intellectual radicalism. The eternal principles of Catholic social teaching are not only applicable, they are sharper and more demanding than ever before in the new wineskins of the Anthropocene. The old wine is not sour. Yesterday we have had the occasion to drink old wine. It was not sour at all. It was really good. It is profound and complex. Its application to the present shows that first, the AI revolution requires digital subsidiarity that protects human authorship and freedom of thought against the tyranny of algorithms and technocratic control. Second, the eco-social transformation requires global intergenerational solidarity that makes concrete form in the recognition and repayment of ecological debt and is firmly committed to a life fit for our grandchildren, for your grandchildren, not for mine, no? Without growth in consumption. The third, the world order in disarray requires political subsidiarity that results in the empowerment of effective international institutions with real teeth to defend the global common good against the dominance of unbridled transnational markets and violent neocolonial imperialisms. Analysis teaches us that the crisis of climate, AI, and global governance are facets of the same unbridled attitude that places individual well-being above the common good. We can no longer afford the wine morally while the world burns. We must rediscover the courage to embrace utopia and believe in the political creative power of the human spirit, connected with the Holy Spirit, I will admit. My speech ends with an appeal to practical theology. The old wineskins of the nation, the unbridled market, and the technological hubris have long since burst. It is up to us not only to patch up the old wineskins, but to weave and assemble new ones in the certainty that the old wine of justice will unfold its full intoxicating effect, even in completely unexpected and possibly entirely new forms. In this sense, Catholic social teaching proves to be the indispensable compass, the GPS, for a future based on solidarity and fairness to your grandchildren. Hvala for your attention.
Hvala profesoru Schwartzu na mislima kojima nas je proveo kroz slojevitu društvenu stvarnost Europe i svijeta, nastojeći ju rasvijetliti svjetlom evanđelja i nadahnućima koja nam pruža crkva svojim socijalnim naukom. Pozivam rektora Tanjića da zaključi svečani akademski čin.
Nakon svih ovih riječi ne preostaje ništa drugo nego da vam još jednom zahvalim što ste bili dionici ovoga slavlja na našem sveučilištu, zajedno s našim sveučilištem i posebice danas našim novim počasnim doktorom Thomasom Schwartzom. Istina je bio jedan poseban trenutak za nas, akademski čin s kojeg vjerujem da svi odlazimo obogaćeni ne samo ovim predavanjem, nego duhom koji nas poziva da još više i na našem sveučilištu, našoj crkvi, u našem društvu, upravo u duhu socijalnog nauka crkve, djelujemo, živimo i radimo. Hvala vam na tome, hvala vam na dolasku. Nadam se da će ovakvih susreta biti još više. Hvala vam i na strpljenju i na svemu onome što smo zajedno mogli danas svjedočiti. Lieber Thomas, ich gratuliere dir nochmals. Vielen Dank für deine Vorlesung. Wir haben vieles gelernt und wir hoffen uns an die zukünftige Zusammenarbeit und wir freuen uns daran, weil wirklich du bist jetzt Teil unserer Universität. Doktor honoris causa. Vielen Dank, Thomas. Alles Gute. Hvala vam.
Svečani akademski čin završit ćemo akademskom himnom Gaudeamus Sigitur. U pjevanju himne predvodit će nas Mija Franceković i Lovro Rimac. Zahvaljujemo svima na dolasku. Počašćeni smo i obogaćeni vašom prisutnošću. Druženje nastavljamo u dvorani C3 koja se nalazi nasuprot ulazu u ovu dvoranu. Doviđenja do sljedećeg susreta.
Gaudeamus Sigitur, Juvenes dum sumus. Gaudeamus Sigitur, Juvenes dum sumus. Post iucundam juventutem, post molestam senectutem, nos habebit humus, nos habebit humus. Vivat academia, vivat professores, vivat academia, vivat professores, vivat membrum quod libet, vivat membra que libet, semper sinti in flore, semper sinti in flore.
Hoćemo, Željko? Hoćemo se slikati tu negdje?